Hi everybody, welcome to this video which is catching you up on our most recent webinar, Putting Transparency to the Test, which was all about looking at how we can measure freedom of information in practice. We had three great speakers, Toby Mendel from the Centre for Law and Democracy, Giovanni Esposito from the University of Brussels, and Maria Zafova from the European University Institute. I won't go into too much more detail other than saying that we would love for you to get in touch with us at ati-cop@mysociety.org. And you'll find all of the information and this recording on our Knowledge Hub as well. So I hope you enjoy the three presentations.
We launched the RTI rating in 2011, so just like a year and a half after CLD was founded. It had, to me, been apparent for quite a long time that we were seeing this massive growth in the number of RTI laws that were, in place and being adopted each year, a bunch of new laws coming on stream. As civil society advocates ourselves and others were spending quite a lot of time, pushing for stronger laws and advocating around that and things. And the idea that a sophisticated assessment methodology for seeing how strong laws were would be an enormously beneficial tool in the sense of, first of all, it would be a scientific and standardized and objective, if I can put it that way of assessing a law. There are nothing like ratings to inspire countries to move up and push up. Over the years of the RTI rating, I have used it endlessly in that way and sort of say, well, to country in this region, your neighbor over there is like 6 points higher than you. What are you going to do about that? And it's amazing how easy it is in a way to get the policymakers and decision makers to bite on that. Whereas if you just say, oh, your law's weak, you should improve it, that's a lot less convincing for them. So the need for this and the benefits of this were very, very apparent to me. I pitched the idea to Helen at Derbyshire at Access Info Europe, who of course tragically died a couple of years ago. And she immediately saw the logic of it, and we worked together on it. We basically put together a draft methodology, so essentially a set of questions or standards against which we would evaluate a piece of legislation. And the idea was that those standards would probe into everything that a good law should have. Hopefully we more or less achieve that. We put in place an advisory team with leading RTI experts from around the world. Some of them advocates, some of them academics, some of them practitioners, and even on the government side and things. So we had a fairly balanced and rounded advisory team. We piloted the methodology on a few laws to see how things were shaken out. The challenge, of course, was then at that time, there were, if I remember correctly, around 85 laws globally, and which is a lot less than the 140 of today, but it's still quite a few laws. And so we then had to go through and assess all of those laws. And we also have another part of the methodology whereby we have a local experts review it, because there may well be, for example, court decisions that we're unaware of, that even though the language as we read it suggests an interpretation going in that direction, they may put a more progressive interpretation on it, or they may apply a constitutional interpretation, so they may change the meaning of the text by through constitutional interpretation. Maybe amendments or regulations that we didn't pick up on, or that we didn't manage to get in one of the languages that we can work in, because we have a few languages available to us, but obviously not all of the languages in the world. So we have a local reviewer to make sure that we're, picking up on all of those nuances. We didn't manage to find local reviewers for every single country, but most of the countries have been reviewed by local reviewers. So we go through that procedure before we finalize the rating and put it out. I would say in terms of changing over time, Uh, we have we have indicators, and most of the indicators get a score of 0, 1, or 2 points, and a few of them have slightly more points, depending on the design of the indicator. We have not changed the base indicators since it was first developed, and that would be, I mean, we sort of would aspire to that, but that would be a huge project. We would have to get quite a lot of funding. We would have to go through the whole procedure of renewing the indicators, but then we would also need to go back and re-rate every country, right? So that's not a small thing to do. But we have adjusted the scoring interpretation or protocols over time. So, we sort of realized that this indicated we were a bit loose on some part of it and tightened it up. We've gotten more scientific or more concrete, or even in some cases, we've changed a little bit the way we score. So we've had some flexibility in that respect. Yeah, and in terms of strengths, I mean, really, the biggest strength is this advocacy potential. I mean, I've lost count of the number of countries where I've used that feature and gone to policymakers or civil society. And also, I mean, it allows civil society groups, we do a rating of draft law, especially, and then the local civil society groups, which are advocating for, can say, okay, here are exactly where the weaknesses are. These are important to us. We're going to focus our firepower on that and try to get changes from that. So, I mean, it has, it's both in the kind of G'ing up by comparative reference, but also in terms of pinpointing exactly the weaknesses and things. I think it's been very, very strong, very, hugely beneficial. In terms of weaknesses, I mean, one of the challenges is that it's, we're putting a template on the whole world in terms of what should be in a law. And I mean, that doesn't always fit, and we only credit issues which are legally or at least binding policy driven. So if you don't have a binding policy on something, at the minimum, you're not going to get any points. So for example, one of them is, are public bodies required to train their officials? So, in a lot of Western countries, there's no rule about that. But of course, officials are actually trained very well, much better than in some countries where there is a rule on that, but the rule isn't followed, but we're still not given the points because there are some frictions, I would say, when you try to apply a template to the whole world. But by and large, I would say it's been a very successful piece of work. When the rating first came out and Western countries were way down, and there were a bunch of Western people, including commissioners and government officials and whatever, who were, either incredulous or unhappy or whatever it was with that. When we come back at them and say, look, basically your law is weak. We'll do a nuts and bolts on it. We'll go bing, 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 and show you how your law is weak. And there's nothing to quibble about that. The problem there is that your law is weak. And if you want to not be at the bottom, fix it, and when we come back like that, defending our methodology because it is defensible, and there may be 5 points that they could have had that they shouldn't know, whatever. But ultimately, countries that are doing poorly are weak laws, and they need to fix it. That's the end of it. Implementation is a much, much more complicated business with, not to exaggerate, but a million different moving parts. For example, the primary duty holders under these laws are individual public authorities, each one of which has to separately implement the law. And each one of them, will be doing better or worse in any given country. And so, and how do you assess all of that? So, I mean, so the RTI evaluation, as we kind of call it for short, and that's the website name as well, we don't come up with a ranking. We don't give a score. We give a red, yellow, green, which gives a general impression of you're doing okay or not too well or better, because it's not that scientific. We rely on a selection of public authorities because at the end of the day, you can't assess all of them because there are at least hundreds in every country and often thousands or even more than that. So, you just can't, it's not feasible to measure them all, not properly anyway. So we grab a selection of them. We let local reviewers, the methodology has to be driven by local actors. So unlike the RTI rating, which we essentially do in-house, so we have to work with local actors. We let them do that. They do test requests as part of the thing. So we have 4 assessment areas. One is central measures, so the oversight system. One is institutional measures, so whether individual public authorities have appointed information officers, train them, manage their records, do that kind of stuff. proactive disclosure and reactive disclosure. So the two main vehicles for actually disclosing it. For proactive disclosure, we look at, is it proactively disclosed? And reactive disclosure, among other things, we do test requests. So obviously, and we let the local actors select the test requests. So there's a huge variance. They select some public authorities. They may select better performers. So we can't, and another country may by chance select poorer performers. We can't really compare that, and they may put harder questions or weaker questions or whatever. But what I will say is that it's a much more in-depth and complicated methodology. It takes us a long time to apply it and things, but it's a deep dive. It gives you a pretty, like every question that should be asked, could be asked. And by the way, we had a whole system for developing it and piloting it and improving it as well, which I won't get into too much detail about. But it really does, give you a pretty good picture of what's working and what's not working in your system, because it really looks at everything. We've applied it in about 8 to 10 countries. So it's a lot more difficult, requires quite a lot of resources to apply and things like that. And I can say that, firstly, we've been quite pleased with the way that public authorities and governments have engaged with this. That by and large, we're not trying to hit them over the head with a hammer. We're trying to help them improve their system, and oversight bodies in particular have by and large engaged, quite well with this. So that's nice. The issues that we're exposing, while there's been a little bit of debate about them, by and large, people accept that those are issues and the things that do need to be improved. Of course, the next stage about whether you actually improve them, and that sometimes requires a bit more resources and things. But so, I would say that overall, we've had quite a good engagement with it, and it's led to, in our projects on that side, we usually try to have additional resources for remedial actions following the test. So you assess implementation, you find out where things are weak, and then you do something to address those at least. So I would say it's been quite successful. And the biggest challenge for us with that is getting the resources to apply it in more places. It is pretty expensive. Yeah, I can't stress enough the importance of an empowered and independent oversight system, information commissioner or commission. It really, it's the make or break. There's almost a kind of a bright blue line, between those countries which don't have that and those countries which do. It doesn't mean that every country which has one of those is doing great. That would be, a little too optimistic. But their chances of doing better are very strong. So that for me is a huge issue. Of course, it's expensive for countries to stand up those institutions. I would argue that they're going to save the money in addressing corruption and inefficiency and maladministration. It's not everything is about corruption. Sometimes just things aren't working properly because people aren't doing their job properly or whatever. Not everything is a grand corruption issue, but this helps expose all of that, and helps being open engages citizens in your development process. I think that just leads to better development outcomes. So I think the money is easily recouped, but it's still a cut off the budget, if you will. So countries are sometimes a little resistant. We just did a major exercise where we put the same 2 requests for information to as many of the 140 countries with laws in the world as we could. And I can say that 38% of the responses that we got were mute refusals. Nothing. Nobody said anything. Nobody came back at all. We had a timeline of 30 days, which is not the timeline in every piece of legislation, although very few laws go beyond that. Like a handful of them allow longer responses to that. We got a couple of formal extensions, but only a couple. So a mute refusal is a killer, right? So that's the biggest problem. We did not get a lot of people claiming exceptions or saying, "Oh, this information is secret." We did not get a lot of charges. We did not get a lot of, as I said, extensions. The biggest, and we got a lot of positive responses. We got some information in 51% of the cases. So 51 plus 38 is putting it close to 90. So there's only a 10% that fell into other categories, but 38% refusals. Probably those public bodies didn't appoint a proper information officer, didn't have an information officer trained, person wasn't doing their job, basic things. with the RTI evaluation, we are very, very open to civil society groups leading in terms of the implementation of that. And so if there are groups, I mean, we don't have resources to, support that around the world. But if there are groups that are interested in doing it and have the resources themselves, we will provide them with the training and the tools and the information that they need. We really welcome that. So please, anyone out there who's listening to this, and we also are very much encourage oversight bodies to lead on that process again, if they can, stand up a few resources for it. We estimate it takes about 30 person days if you hire a consultant to manage the whole process. So, I mean, it's a piece of work, but it's not an enormous piece of work, and we will, support throughout the thing. We're very interested in that.
It's really a pleasure to be with you here today and share my my work. Okay, so the focus of the presentation I'm giving you today is related to this project we have here at the ULB University in Brussels, which is called Transact, Transparency in Action. And it addresses the the critical issue that Toby Mendel mentioned before, which is how to understand, study, explore the actual implementation of FOI laws. Okay, so this is the scope of this project. Let me start with few background information about this project. As I said, this is part of the work I'm conducting here at the ULB as a director of this small but very interesting research center, which is called CEPAP, Centre d'études des politiques et de l'administration publique. So it's a research unit on public policy and administration and ULB. And one of the research axes we have is government transparency and freedom of information law. An axis that I've set up with with my colleague and friend Vincent Mabillard, professor here at ULB. And what do we mean by government transparency in our work? We refer to this as the practice of making government's actions, decisions, and governance processes accessible to the public. And why this matters for a research unit in public policy and administration? Because when these policies are effective, then the information asymmetry between citizens and government officials is reduced, or anyway, is mitigated. And this has a number of positive effects in terms of governmental accountability. So it improves, if you want, the functioning of democratic systems in this sense. And it also has positive effects in terms of efficiency and effectiveness of the public administration. For instance, it leads to a reduction of corruption phenomena in this sense. So in this sense, it can improve to the efficiency of public administration operations. So within the framework of this research axis that focus on government transparency, here at ULB, we have set up this project, which is called Transact. A huge support in the setting up of this project was provided by our fellow colleagues in the University of Naples, who particularly provided us with expertise on field experiments. I will come back in a little bit on how field experiments are useful for measuring what we call the implementation gap. And as also was mentioned by Julia in the introduction, this project relies on citizen science. What does it mean? That in the research process, there are certainly professional researchers, academics, and you have here the broad network that we have, and that has enabled us to run field experiments beyond the Belgian context, okay? We're now running similar experiments in Switzerland, Romania. We're preparing one in South Africa. But when we rely on citizen science methodologies, non-professional researchers are involved in the design of the research process and in the collection of the data needed to accomplish this research. And so we work a lot with civil society organizations. The project that I will present you today within Transact is our field experiment in Belgium. And this was not possible to be accomplished without the support of Transparencia.be, which is the organization managing Enalavateli platforms here in Belgium, and they were crucial to work and to design and implement the field experiment here in Belgium. But why we are so interested in FOI laws and their implementation? Well, this slide is particularly explicative of this interest, and as Toby Mendel was saying also before, over the last years there has been clearly an increasing adoption, formal adoption of FOI laws around the world, across both democratic and non-democratic countries. So regardless of the political system adopted within the country, these laws were increasingly adopted by legislators, okay? And you see on the right hand that a wide majority of countries around the world has nowadays an FOI law, okay? But the literature on these laws is also clear about the fact that governments frequently comply with their own FOI legislation. Okay, so in practice, when a citizen files an FOI request to a public authority, there might be no response, partial response, a refusal in disclosing information. And so this leads to low de facto compliance rates with the existing legislation. And this is why, and this is what we exactly call the implementation gap. Okay, so the implementation gap between the formal adoption of the law and the implementation in practice of the law. If you want, there is a discrepancy between the de jure dimension of the law on paper, the one adopted by a country, and the de facto dimension of the law, how the law is practiced in the day-to-day activities of public administrations. And so what we want to do with our project, and what we are doing actually since 2022, is to measure this implementation gap, so to size to size it, but also to explain why this implementation gap exists, okay? As Toby Mendel was saying, there are several indicators to measure FOI laws. He presented the RTI index. There is also the CPI index, which is the corruption perception index. We have the transparency index. But perhaps you might have noticed while I was going through the slides that the ranking of countries according to the index was changing, okay? And so here there's an issue with the measurement of transparency. And this becomes clear, for instance, if we look at what are the top 5 countries when we use the RTI index that mainly measures the de jure dimension of the law. And when we look at countries and FOI systems through the lenses of an index such as the Transparency Index, which tries to combine both the de facto dimension and the de jure dimension. So this is why at one point we were with my colleagues and folks, let's say, from the network, we got interested in analyzing and measuring the de facto dimension of the law. And so we found that a very nice way of doing this is the use of field experiments, okay? What is a field experiment? Okay, so it's pretty intuitive. Experiments happen, traditional experiments happen in the lab. Field experiments happen in the field, so directly in real world settings. So in relation to FOI laws and the implementation of FOI laws, it consists, a field experiment, in submitting systematically requests to public administrations following a protocol, an experimental protocol, and I'll be back in a little bit about this, observing the responses of the public authorities and occasionally modifying the content of the request to gauge the impact of these modifications on the responsiveness of the public authorities. And so far there have been many experiments, several field experiments conducting in different countries. The one in Italy was led by our friends from the University of Naples. We're actively working on these experiments, and the one in Belgium that I will present you now. As you see, Belgium was not among the countries covered by these approaches to study the implementation gap. This was interesting for us because Belgium has an FOI law since 1994. Okay, the transparency is part of the Belgian constitution, Article 34, and regional laws have been adopted across the 3 regions to transpose the constitutional principles. Okay, and so nowadays there are minimal differences among the regional laws, but an individual, based on these laws, can submit written requests, including via email, to public administrations to have access to government-held documents. There is no need to demonstrate a specific interest, and public administrations have up to a maximum of 45 days to make the request document available to the requester, unless, of course, the document is not covered by legal exemptions of the law. And so with Transparencia.be, we established contact with Transparencia.be, who, beside managing the platform in Belgium, is also active in lobbying and advocacy on these matters in Belgium. And we decided to set up a field experiment. So we had 2 main questions, okay? The first one was, do Belgian municipalities respond to FOI requests and provide the request information? Second question is, do they discriminate among requesters? We know from the literature that has used field experiments that different requesters' profile can trigger, let's say, different responsive behaviors on the administration that they approach. And so we decided to send requests in the Belgian experiment from 3 different profiles. Okay, a common citizen with a generic standard Belgian name, a French-speaking university professor known in the French-speaking environment for his research on transparency. In our case, was Vincent Mabillard, and request sent from the Transparencia.be platform, and so requests sent by individuals who are a part, let's say, of a civil society environment that has an interest in FOI laws. We also knew from the literature that what can influence the likelihood of answering FOI requests is whether the requester mentioned or not the law into force in their countries and granting them the right to access to ask the document. And so we decided that part of the request of the common citizen and the university professor were also sent either in part by mentioning the law, and in the other part without mentioning the FOI law. Okay, we send this request to all 581 municipal administrations of Belgium, and we had 2 experimental objectives. So the first one was to understand how municipalities react to different types of requester profiles. The second one was to test whether explicitly mentioning the FOI law influenced the likelihood of responsiveness of a response by the public, by the municipal administration. With Transparencia, we decided to ask this document, the agenda of the last municipal council meeting with its annexes, for 2 reasons. One is methodological. This document is a standard document available in all Belgian municipalities, and so we could ask the same document to all administrations. Second one was related to the previous advocacy work of Transparencia.be, which was particularly interested and related to having public and municipal administrations in Belgium making this document available to citizens when this was requested by the citizens. And so they told us that a nice test would be around this document. Okay, so here you see our experimental design, okay? So we, based on the story I told you before and the design we did with Transparencia, so in this sense, this was a citizen sciences experiment because we designed the experiment with Transparencia.eu. We had 5 experimental groups, okay? A control group, the common citizen, baseline scenario, no mentioning FOI. Then the other 4 groups add some variations to this baseline scenario, and these are what we call the treatment groups. Okay, so a citizen mentioning FOI in the request. So the idea is to look at the effect of invoking rights when doing the request. Third group, professor, the effect of status. Fourth scenario, fourth treatment group, professor mentioning the FOI law, the combined effect of invoking rights and having in status. And fifth group, the advocacy organization, so requests sent from Transparencia.eu. When they arrive to the public administration, there is the signature of the platform. So they know that it's coming from the environment of Transparencia.eu. And then, as we usually do in experiments, we randomized the allocation of the request. We stratified the randomization because we want to check if there are any effects related to the region in which the municipality is placed and the size of the city. Okay, and these are standard approaches in the literature that deals with countries such as Belgium, which are federal countries and so have subnational levels of governments. So the emails were sent in English and Dutch, depending on the language on the municipality. And we did this with the help of students from my course in Innovations in Policy Evaluation. Part of the teaching I do to my students is field experiments with an application to FOI laws. And so we decided to do together this experiment as it was in 2023 as a part of the class. And so they were sending the emails, and they coded under our supervision. Our colleagues from Naples were also involved. This is a picture from the class. We coded the answers using 5 modalities, okay, 5 categories: no reply, denial, unsatisfactory reply, partial reply, and complete reply. Okay, so 5 modalities to code the answers. And these are the results. Okay, so I show you the results. So first of all, the 36% of municipalities, regardless of the treatment, so of the experimental group they were allocated, did not respond, whereas about 30% provided at least a partial reply. What is a partial reply? Perhaps they send the agenda, but not the annexes. Okay, so this is an example. Or we asked for all the annexes, then they sent only the 30% of the annexes. Okay. Secondly, while almost 50% of small municipalities did not provide a reply, over 50% of large municipalities provided at least a partial reply. Okay, so what is our hypothesis? These are just descriptive statistics, okay? But so hard to have a statistically causality that can be established here. We're working on that now. But the hypothesis one interpretation is that municipal size can impact the response behavior, with larger municipalities being more responsive and likely to provide at least partial disclosure compared to smaller municipalities. Okay, so basically large municipal administrations, because perhaps they have more resources, they perform better in answering. Second aspect, regional dimension. I said that there was the regional stratification in the randomization. This is the results. Municipalities providing at least partial replies, so partial or full. In Brussels are the 58%, in Brussels region. Flanders region, 46%. Wallonia, 21%. So one way of interpreting it is that perhaps regional context can impact response and disclosure rates. Okay, so different governance systems at the regional in regional administration can have an impact. Okay. Fourth aspect is the the profile of the requesters, okay? So we see that common citizens mentioning FOI laws in their request have the highest disclosure rates, whereas professors mentioning FOI and requests coming through transparencia.be have the highest no reply rates, okay? So municipalities, one way of interpreting this is that municipalities have higher resistance to reply to FOI requests coming from individuals that they perceive as knowledgeable about FOI requests. So somehow they perceive these requests riskier, okay? They see more risk in these people. Perhaps they could do some inquiry, okay, through their request. And last aspect that we decided to check was this one. So I told you that we had a group of students sending the request, and we noticed that some groups were very motivated. So they were very fast in the following up with administrations asking more information about the request. Others were just following the baseline of the protocol, the experimental protocol, okay? So, and we decided to measure this commitment, okay, using the grading system of Belgian education universities, okay? And what we found was that higher levels of citizen commitment, so the grade, correlates with municipalities' higher response rates and higher disclosure rates. And we also see that higher commitment correlates with higher citizen-bureaucrat interaction. So more interactions between the requester and the administration on the other side. So this was interesting because this suggests that citizens' commitment in submitting FOI requests can influence municipalities' response behavior. So I move towards the end. And what are the key takeaways of this experiment? And what are the hypotheses we're working now with our colleagues? First, regional differences matter, okay? So there are distinct governance models that can impact how the laws are implemented in practice. The municipal size matters, and we see that larger municipalities perform better in implementing the law. Okay, so there is here perhaps something to be understood in terms of equipment and resources in handling FOI requests. Requester's identity as play a role as well in the implementation of the law in practice. We see that actors seen as knowledgeable in FOI because they are perhaps perceived more riskier, are those who are who face more difficulties in accessing the law, okay? This is clearly problematic, especially for journalists, for instance, okay? Especially if we consider the period we are living now in democratic societies. And fourth, the citizens' engagement. This is very interesting because on the one hand, we usually look at the supply side of transparency policy. So basically the information providers, okay, the public administration, how we improve the supply side, okay, how we improve the way how information is provided. But here we see that the demand side is also important. So basically the information seekers and how the information seekers deploy strategies to secure the information. Last slide about the next step. As I said, now we're trying to have a better understanding of the hypothesis that I showed you while I was mentioning the results. And we've also launched more experiments. As I said, one was just accomplished in Switzerland, one is going to start in Romania, and we're planning one in South Africa. Beside of that, we've decided to retrieve information also from Alaveteli platforms using Transparencia.be as a case study. And we want to run the same type of study, basically. We want to see how the request topic, tone, the recipient authority influence the likelihood of receiving a reply or a refusal or a silence on the side of the administration. And I stop here. Thank you for your attention and glad to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Julia, for your kind introduction and also for the invitation. I hope you can see my slides well. Yes, so I'm looking into the demand side. My main research question was, what is it that the public is actually interested to know from the information requests. And I studied this looking at the requests sent to the UK central government through What Do They Know platform. So just to give you, just to give you a brief overview of the presentation. So I'll present the main research question. I discuss a bit the literature that I draw from, but very briefly, and then talk about the data I used, how I analyzed them, and then I get to the finding. So the main research question that somehow drove this research was exactly this: like, what is it that the public want to know from the government? And in this case, from the UK government. And I was primarily interested whether it is this accountability seeking, like holding the governments accountable, that drives citizens to submit access to information requests, or are the interests of requesters much broader? And how I approach access to information in this work. So at the beginning, I started with this very common definition of access to information as access to complete, accurate public interest information. But I put the public interest into brackets because my findings actually contest this definition to some extent, and I'll get back to this when I discuss findings. I was mostly interested in demand because I feel the research on transparency, and I myself consider a researcher focusing mostly on the politics of transparency reforms. Like, we focus on many different areas, but much of this research, including my own, was always based on this assumption that access to information policies, they serve a government oversight function. So they are mostly envisaged and adopted with this intention to hold government and other powerful actors accountable. And that has also implications for the use. So there is this underlying assumption that access to information legislation and requests, they would be submitted mostly by investigative journalists or activists exactly to expose corruption or mismanagement of public resources. So there has been always this transparency, accountability relations, but this has been very rarely tested. So I was curious to look into the information requests for these precise reasons, to see if this is actually the case, if citizens submit information requests with this in mind. And I think this is not only because of the lack of interest in the topic, but also because of the difficulty to study this, because there are very few public administration portals that make this data available. I was aware of the Mexican government portal that allowed to see all the interactions between requesters and public servant, and to see how they responded and when they responded. So that was possible, and there has been fantastic research done by Dan Berliner and his co-authors on Mexican information requests. There's something by Dokenia on Albanian requests, and also something on the US, but in general, this is very difficult to study because there's a lack of comprehensive information. And when I looked at the information demand, I found this information gathering matrix, a conceptual framework developed by Greg Michener and Benjamin Worthy, quite useful, because they argue that actually the uses might be very heterogeneous, and requesters might submit requests in public or private interest. And in terms of content, it might be political or completely non-political. And I'm mentioning this because it was very useful for me then when I looked into the requests to somehow categorize them. Why I decided to focus on the UK and what do they know? So also for what Giovanni mentioned, that in the UK, I mean, I think it's one of the cases where there's also quite big demand, but also quite good supply. And access to information legislation in the UK has been widely used, and I think something that helped to some extent also to make it very well known as a legislation was also MP's expenses scandal, and so there has been an increase in requests to the central government, at least based on the statistics that the Cabinet Office publishes on annual basis. But at the same time, also, as Giovanni mentioned, that one thing is that the citizen engagement can drive responsiveness and the better responses. It also works the other way around. The better responses then encourage citizens to engage more with the law. So, and in the UK still, I mean, although the rate of information requests that are being responded on time is decreasing every year, that's also available in the Cabinet Office annual statistics, but still I would say that the rate of 76% being responded on time is quite decent. So for me, it was mostly this use and also the supply of information that makes it interesting, because there's a wealth of data. And it's also interesting because information requests are real world interactions. So there's very little bias that comes in. And so what data I use and analyze? So I have to, first of all, thanks to my society, because my research wouldn't be possible without them and without What Do They Know platform. So the data I analyzed is basically around 40,000, almost 40,000 information requests that were sent to the UK central government bodies via What Do They Know within a decade from 2008 and 2017. And I'm looking in the full text of requests and the date it was submitted, mostly these two variables, and just maybe some descriptive data in case you're interested. So the institution or the government body that receives the highest number of requests was the Department of Work and Pensions, and Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Justice, Department of Education, Department of Health and Social Care. And I haven't included all of them because some really receives, there are actually few that receives a handful of requests per year. And I also must disclose that I haven't included Home Office for privacy reasons, because there were too many personal data in the requests themselves. So Home Office is completely excluded from the analysis. And how I analyze the data, so I use the text as data approaches, concretely topic modeling. So I estimated a topic model on this data, which means that it basically estimate the probability of finding certain topics within a corpus of textual data, in this case, information requests. And I also had to get rid of the words that are very common or occur frequently in communication between public servant and requester. So things like greetings or titles, or then the institutions, like when they address dear officer at the ministry X and Y. And these are the results. So when it comes to the topics that were mostly predominant in this sample of information requests from 2008 to 2017, the most prevalent, most predominant was welfare reform. Then the second one was labeled as related to transparency, and requesters mostly asked about correspondence between government members and lobbyists or other important figures of political and economic life. And then the third was official statistics. Fourth, most predominant, again, linked to transparency, and requesters mostly ask about meetings, minutes, expenses. Then it was followed by asking for legal documents, for rules, guidelines related to public administration, and then education. And then you can see the list of those remaining. What was for me interesting to see that yes, there were topics that clearly deal with accountability seeking. So the topic 4, where requesters ask about correspondence, or topic 20, when they asked for meetings minutes or expenses. There were some others as well. So another one that was labeled as transparency asked for documents, for contracts. But in general, when I had a look at these information gathering metrics that I introduced at the beginning and tried to categorize all these topics within these quadrants of this matrix, I was able to came to the conclusion that basically, yes, accountability seeking requests are very important. They are still predominant, but in reality, they account only for 1/3 of all requests. So the rest were these requests that could have been labeled as informing to empower, or securing some personal benefits, or ensuring fairness. And I was curious also about this most predominant topic that I labeled as the welfare reform, because all of these requests to some extent related to the welfare reform. And what you can see in this figure is how this topic, how the proportion of requests related to the welfare reform, how they evolved over time during the studied period, so from 2008 to 2018. And as you can see, there has been a slight increase starting in 2010-11, and then there has been a high increase in information requests asking about welfare reform around 2013-14, and the interest in the topic was, let's say, up until 2016. And if you look at how the method work is that the first part is basically just a statistical method, trying to somehow group these words based on group these topics based on the semantic proximity of the words. But then, of course, I had to read the sample for each topic in full, so I'm able to make sense of these topics. And it was possible to clearly see that yes, there is a link because in 2012 there was this Welfare Reform Act in the UK adopted, and then in 2015 there was Welfare Reform and Work Act adopted. And when I read through some of the information requests, mostly it was not even information requests per se, as they are defined in legal terms, but mostly complaints of these policy beneficiaries who said that they are very confused about the changes that have been introduced, that they don't fully understand them, and they really did not receive well these policy changes. So mostly they raised criticism and also sought clarification. There were many information requests asking about what is the method for calculating the pension age, or many just basically concluded that severely disabled people with lifelong conditions were suddenly assessed as fit to work. So they like, oftentimes this was used, information requests were used to raise these concerns about this new policy in place and how it was ill-conceived. So they argued that that the reform left vulnerable, disadvantaged groups behind and stigmatized them even further. So for me, this was one of the most interesting findings, that information requests were used in a completely different way that they were initially intended when these reforms were adopted. So beyond this accountability seeking, and here I also included another topic that was labeled as disability and fit for work assessment over time, where the results were basically very similar to what I just described about the welfare reform. So again, mostly rather than information requests in a strict sense, they were used as a platform to raise concerns. And to conclude, because this session is called is access to information working well in practice? And I was thinking about this question in relation to my research, and I think it very much depends on where you stand and what you expect from transparency. So my findings definitely concluded that the uses are manifold. They go beyond accountability seeking and the use and of information requests, but also the public demand for information is very heterogeneous. But I still think that despite they are used for a goal that was not initially intended in this reform, I think it still works quite well. And I think we might want to look beyond this accountability framework and think about other benefits of information requests, because for me, it was really kind of a litmus test of public support for new laws and policies in case of this welfare reform. Because during the same period, there were other important legislation adopted in the UK that were very much discussed in the media, but they didn't. It wasn't reflected in information requests, so people didn't ask about these. And the reason was that these were accepted very well, whereas welfare reform people had many reservations. So I think it's also a useful source of information for policymakers on how people actually react to the new policies. So I would argue that maybe information requests are not always submitted in line with what they were foreseen for, but still this is very useful. So they might point to other things that don't work well in practice. So for instance, if someone has to use information requests to ask about his immigration status or to ask about how his pension age should be calculated, it clearly shows that there's something not working well with these policies that should, or with the agencies that should be dealing with these issues. So in my view, I would conclude that yes, maybe the uses are different than we expected, but I think it's still extremely useful. So thank you.